Physical Science 20 Introduction and Review. This is BEDMAS calculations when we're taking into account keeping track of significant figures, and it goes along with the IR6 assignment. You need to follow the rules of BEDMAS. Brackets first, then exponents. Division before multiplication, and then the last thing you do is adding, then subtracting. You carry out each step according to the rules of what procedure you are applying. If you're adding or subtracting, I recommend you stack the numbers on the side of your page, draw that round off line to determine how many significant figures are in your answer. If you're dividing or multiplying, of course you're going with the lowest number of significant figures found in the numbers being multiplied or divided. You keep track of your significant figures, but you never round until you get to your final answer. You don't have to keep all the numbers on your calculator, but you probably should keep at least an extra 4 numbers that are not significant. In the answer key and in the examples, I underline the numbers that are not significant. This way, I don't round until I get to the end, but I can keep track of how many significant figures each step has. When I mark your quiz and when it comes to the test, I will be looking to see which numbers you have underlined as you've worked your way through the questions. If you haven't underlined anything, you won't get any marks. So I have to see step by step that you are identifying these are the numbers which are significant in this step, and these are the numbers that are not significant in this step that I'm carrying until I get to my final answer. Example 1. I start by punching into my calculator what is inside the brackets. So 3040 plus 34.0320, and my calculator spits out 3074.032. To determine the number of significant figures, I go to the side of my page and I stack the two numbers I've added. And then I go from left to right until one of the numbers that I'm adding has run out of significant figures. And it's going to be the top number. It runs out of significant figures after the 4, which means 307 is significant, 4.032 is not. So I will underline 4.032. So I add meters plus meters, and when I add numbers or subtract, the unit does not change. So my answer is 3074.032 meters with 3 significant figures, and the rest of the equation drops down. Now I'm multiplying these two numbers, so I punch it into my calculator, 3074.032 multiplied by 231.8, and my calculator gives me 712560.6. This is multiplication, and my first number had 3 sig figs, second number had 4 significant figures, so that means my answer could only have 3 significant figures. So 712 is significant, 560.6 is not, so I underline 560.6. Unit-wise, I had meters multiplied by meters squared, which gives me meters cubed. So now I write my final answer. 712 is what I'm keeping. After rounding, it becomes 713. So I will write 7.13 times 10 to the 5 meters cubed. Example 2. I'm going to start by doing the addition inside the brackets. So I punch in 0.0234 plus 21.312, and my calculator spits out 21.3354. To determine the number of significant figures, I'm going to have to stack those two numbers and then move from left to right until one of those numbers has run out of significant figures. The bottom number runs out after the 2, so that means 21.335 is significant. 4 is not, so I underline the 4. When I'm adding, my units do not change, so liters plus liters gives me liters. I'm going to then divide by, well, what's inside the other set of brackets. So I'm going to punch 5.230, subtract 0.034 into my calculator, and that gives me 5.196. Again, I stack those numbers. I move left to right until one of those numbers runs out of significant figures. Turns out they both do at the same spot, which means everything is significant and I don't have to underline anything. Unit-wise, liters subtract liters gives me liters. And I'm going to move on to my division step. So I'll put 21.3354 divided by 5.196 into my calculator, and I get 4.10612. I was dividing. First number had 5 significant figures, second had 4, so that means my answer can have 4 significant figures. So 4.106 is significant, 12 is not. Unit-wise, I had liters divided by liters, which means my answer will have no units. So my final answer is then 4.106. Example 3. I start with what's inside the brackets. So I'm going to put into my calculator 123.0 subtract 24.28. And my calculator gives me 98.72. Everything else in the line will then drop down. And since I only have one number now inside of that bracket, I can eliminate those brackets. Now before I move on, I have to determine the number of significant figures and the unit in 98.72. Since I was subtracting, I stack the two numbers. I move left to right until one of those numbers that's being subtracted runs out of sig figs. It's the top number that runs out first after the 0, so that means 98.7 is significant. The 2 is not, so I underline the 2. When subtracting, the unit does not change, so meters subtract meters gives me meters. Now again, I do what's inside the brackets. 98.72 multiplied by 45.45. Punch it into my calculator, I get 4,486.824. And the rest of that line will drop down. And that set of brackets will no longer be needed because there's only one number inside those brackets. Determining significant figures in the number I calculated, well, I had 3 sig figs multiplied by 4 sig figs, so my answer can only have 3 significant figures. So 448 is significant. I will underline 6.824 because it is not. Unit-wise, I had meters multiplied by something with no unit, which gives me meters. Now I punch 4486.824 multiplied by 23.504 into my calculator, and I get a really big number. The first number had 3 sig figs, the second number had 5. So when I multiply something with 3 sig figs by something with 5 sig figs, I'm only allowed to keep 3 significant figures. So 105 is significant, 458.3113 is not. Unit-wise, I had meters multiplied by meters, which gives me a unit of meters squared. So my final answer is 1.05 times 10 to the 5 meters squared. Example 4. I have to adhere strictly to the rules of BEDMAS, so I do division before multiplication. So I will start by dividing 0.050 by 1.20, and that gives me 0.0416 repeating, and everything else will drop down. To get this answer, I divided something with 2 sig figs by something with 3 significant figures, so my answer can only have 2 significant figures. And since zeros in front cannot be significant, that means the 4 and 1 are significant, and I will underline all the 6's because they are not. Unit-wise, I had meters divided by meters, which gave me no unit. Now I'm going to multiply 160.0 by 0.041666666666 repeating. I just punched it in a whole bunch in my calculator. And my calculator spits out 6.6666 repeating. The rest of the line will then drop down. Now on the 6.666 repeating number, well, to get that, I multiplied something with 4 sig figs by something with 2 significant figures. So that means my answer could only have 2 significant figures. So the first 2 6's are significant, but the rest are not. So I underline the rest of the 6s. Unit-wise, I had meters multiplied by something with no unit, which means the 6.6 repeating has a unit of meters. Now that 6.6 repeating number, I will drop down, and I'm going to subtract the product of 21.012 multiplied by 12.310. So when I carry out that multiplication step in my calculator, I get 258.65772. When I multiplied those numbers, that was 5 sig figs multiplied by 5 sig figs, so my answer is 5 significant figures, so 258.65 is significant. Everything else is not, so I underline 772. My units, so I had meters multiplied by something with no units, which will give me meters. Now I'm going to have to subtract. And a good indication that I have done things correctly is the fact that I'm subtracting two numbers that have units that are identical. If I get to an addition or subtraction step and I don't have identical units, I know I've made a mistake somewhere. The only time I can add or subtract is if my units are identical. So 6.6 repeating, subtract 258.65772. I punch in my calculator. I get negative 251.99105. I'm going to stack those numbers, and then I'm going to go left to right until I run out of significant figures in one of the numbers in my subtraction line. My top number runs out after the second 6, which means 2519 is significant, 9105 is not. So I underline 9105. So in the end, my significant figures are 251.9, which are going to have to round up because I'm dropping 9105. So 2519 becomes 2520. Unit-wise, we'll add meters, subtract meters like we said, and that will give us meters. So my final answer is negative 2.520 times 10 to the 2 meters. And that's the end of the lesson. You're going to work on the IR6 BEDMAS assignment.